Welcome back to Data Driven Leadership. I'm your host, Jess Carter. Today, we have Brooke Austin, Director of Digital Business Development at the United States Tennis Association and the former winner of the NCAA Division I Women's Tennis Championship in 2006 and 2017, along with Mary Catharine Grau, our engagement manager at Resultant and an enthusiastic tennis lover. Welcome, you guys.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. And MCG, I'm going to call Mary Catharine Grau that because we've known each other for 10 years and that's her initials. MCG, I'm so glad that you're here too because I have initial confession. I run a data podcast. I'm not a technical person. It would be easy for people to think I have imposter syndrome when I talk to technologists. I don't. I have imposter syndrome talking to Brooke because I do not play tennis. Like at all.
I think Brooke will be happy to share her love of the game with you. And I should say tennis lover here, but I got back into the game a couple of years ago after taking kind of a long hiatus since high school. And so I'm maybe like a struggling practicing tennis player at this point in time, but my love of the game has not diminished. I got back on the court and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. This is where I belong. It's so fun. It's such a fun game to play. And Jess, if it makes you feel any better, I'm also not a podcaster. So we have that in common.
So we all have things we're overcoming together on this call. My knowledge, Mary Catharine's skill, Brooke's podcast experience. So, okay, Brooke, one of my first questions is going to be like, how long have you played? Did you grow up playing tennis?
Yeah, so I actually started playing tennis when I was 7. One of my friends, her mom, played in a league, and we had a play date, if that's what you want to call it, back in the day. And we tagged along, my friend and I, and then at the end of the lesson, her coach saw us sort of waiting and asked if we wanted to hit a couple balls, and she hand-fed us a couple tennis balls, and I could hit it. I guess I had pretty good hand-eye coordination for a 7-year-old. And the lady that was the coach told my friend's mom that, and then my friend's mom told my parents. My parents asked me if I wanted to play tennis, and I said sure. And here we are. So, yeah.
Holy cow. MCG, did you grow up playing, or did you pick it up in high school?
I grew up playing through the NJTL program, so National Junior Tennis League, which was started by Arthur Ashe and has a really big presence in Indianapolis. It's frankly like really inexpensive lessons for kids around the country. And so I grew up doing those. And then when I got into high school, I started doing also like a little bit more serious lessons as well. I was more of like an academic all-star tennis player than like a real athletic all-star tennis player, but I loved the game.
Amazing. Yeah. I've never done any sport exceptionally well, but what I can do, I'm versatile. So I can play a lot of different things and pick them up quickly, but I don't master anything. I'm sort of like a lifelong intramural player. I'm just like a golden retriever. I just want to play. I've played a little bit and I think it's so hard, but that might be because, Brooke, I had the opposite experience of you where my hand-eye coordination is very low, like embarrassing, laughable, funny.
Yeah, I get that a lot when people ask me about tennis. Typically, their main chance of playing tennis or previous experience was like high school PE or middle school PE. And a lot of people say the same thing. So it's not just you.
I imagine one can improve their hand-eye coordination over time. Does this feel accurate? You feel like an expert I can ask.
Yeah, for sure. Tennis is a repetition sport. So typically, the more you practice, the better you're going to get. So I would say yes.
Okay. All right. I have hope then is what you're telling me. So some people might be wondering why tennis on a data podcast. So Brooke, you're at USTA Connect. Can you tell us a little bit about what that role is like, maybe what it means to you to be a data-driven leader in a tennis association?
Yeah, for sure. So my title is, like she'd mentioned at the beginning, is the Director of Digital Business Development. Essentially, my team, I'm on the sales team. So we are out in the field meeting people, doing the whole shebang. But essentially, I am in a unique position because I'm in charge of the USTA Connect platform, which, like Jess mentioned, is all data-driven stuff. In the tennis industry, this is very exciting for me because obviously I grew up playing, but we've never had a real-time tennis data platform. In our industry, everyone has been waiting for our year-end TIU, TIA reports that come out, I think, December 15th. So all throughout the year, no one really knows what the sport of tennis is looking like. Is it growing? Is it declining? what racket sales look like, all of that stuff. So we here at USTA created a new platform called USTA Connect, and it's been really cool to grow the platform and work with almost all of the big brands in tennis that I grew up playing with, and growing those relationships and bringing on new partners and growing the platform and getting as much data as we can. So that way we can make better data-driven business decisions here.
Brooke, I'm curious who your partners are for this. So you mentioned that the goal is to provide real-time information. So who's feeding into it? Where are you gathering the data and who's using it?
We have 4 different sectors: retailers, manufacturers, facilities and clubs, players, so our USTA data, and then the big like retailer clothing brand. So working with all of them. So some names that we have that are signed on as partners right now are Babolat, Head, Dunlop, and then retail side, Frometh and Tennis Point. They're 2 of the largest tennis retailers. But those are just some examples. And essentially how it's sort of working is we are collecting like rackets sold per zip code, shoes sold per zip code, balls sold per zip code from across the whole country. And then we have 2 ways of importing it into our USTA data lake, so via either API or secure file transfer.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and in return, the companies get some additional like partner perks of some different marketing benefits on our Connect website. We do a couple press releases. We're actually doing a press release tomorrow announcing 5 new partners. And along with that, they also get access to those data reports that include our geospatial analytics tool that we have here. So they're able to see all of their sales as well and use that data for whatever they would want to use it for.
And how long has it been here? How long have you had USTA Connect live?
I started almost exactly a year ago. I started last June. We sort of hit the ground running. So really probably I would say officially last September is when it really launched.
That is super cool.
It's a newer platform, but it's grown very, very, very quickly.
As a player, I noticed the difference in the user interface, right? Like it looked a certain way when I went to register for my summer league, and now it looks a different way. And it's fantastic. I can see all of my information, rankings, levels, all of that. So how's it changing the way players are interacting with each other?
Right now, this is more of a B2B type platform, but I think the end goal is to be able to incorporate this more player to player. I know we've talked about potentially even having in the long run, maybe, want to emphasize maybe, having some sort of online platform within our Serve Tennis where you log into join tournaments, leagues, where you'd be able to connect with brands and stuff like that. So I know nothing's officially been put together, but it's been talked about. So right now we're just focused on bringing on partners and getting that data up and running first.
Well, it's like so smart of you, because I think a lot of people don't understand when you're building a platform like this, consumption will follow if there's good data in it in the first place. And so figuring out how do you feed it with the most high quality, high volume data that people want, and then how do we leverage that data in a way that brings the rest of the users on board. That's a difficult 10 to 15 year career lesson that I've seen a lot of data leaders learn. So I'm impressed that you started there and under a year got there. But the other thing that I think is really interesting about it is when you're on this kind of journey and you're this early, a lot of it is the ingenuity of, okay, we got all this data in here. How do we want to use it? And so there's some exploration, I imagine, you're going through as an entity, right? Of, hey, like what's working really well? What did we think was going to be really valuable and it wasn't? Like, do you have any of those lessons already learned, or are we still on the early exploration phase?
Both. So we've learned as we've grown here. We've really sort of built the plane as we've flown. So a perfect example is when we first started doing this, we now have a USTA Connect portal where, like I said, for the secure file transfer, people can now log in with a unique user ID and password and upload the data themselves. Whereas previously I was emailing people and collecting Excel files every month.
What a high use of your skills and talent.
Yeah. So we've come a long way. It is growing very quickly, and we're really building the plane as it flies. I know the portal, it's been a success so far because it takes a lot of that work away from me, but also with having a portal, we have the ability to build it out, add dashboards, do other things to it. So it makes it even more interactive for the partners and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Well, and Mary Catharine mentioned rankings. So I don't think I understood before this call. So like every player has a ranking. Is that right? Like every tennis player has a ranking?
So not necessarily. So some have rankings, some have NTRP ratings.
What's an NTRP rating?
It's like a self-rated assessment as to where you are as a player. So we have different leagues, and there's 3.0, 3.5, and then you've got up to 4.0, 4.5 players. So it just indicates what your play level is.
Okay. One of the other things that's intriguing to me is, do those stats get updated all the time, like regularly throughout the year?
Yes. So World Tennis Number is updated every Wednesday afternoon. NTRP, my gosh, don't quote me on this. I feel like it's monthly, if I believe.
Brooke, we're on a podcast. I don't have to quote you. You're being recorded.
Like I said, I'm not a professional podcaster, so bear with me. But yeah, they're both updated pretty consistently.
When you have a whole bunch of data coming out at the end of the year, data coming out on Wednesdays, there is this fun, no matter what, there's a fun value proposition of, could we just get more real time with any of that? And is that valuable? And so like, does it have to be on Wednesdays, or could it be more near real time that we update player rankings? Or is there a reason we don't do that? And looking at the end of the year, it's like, hey, how do we help these brands understand that if they consume this data more quickly throughout the year and more real time, they can actually make significant changes? And you said it's down to like the zip code. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So we have two different levels of data right now. We start off with blind aggregate data. So that's like balls sold per zip code, shoes sold per zip code with no personal information being shared. And then we also have non-aggregate data, which would include more personal information of the users. So typically what happens is we start them off with doing blind aggregate data to get them all set up and running and feeling like they're able to do this and it's not a huge burden for them. And then as the relationship grows, then we start talking to them about doing non-aggregate data, and also for like the software companies that we work with, them doing more integrations with World Tennis Number and TRP and stuff like that. So yeah, it's both. I mean, it's growing.
That's so cool.
I'm curious. You've been there a year. The focus on this is B2B, and it sounds like you have lots of people who probably typically worked against each other or like in competition working together, right? How did this initiative come about? It sounds helpful for everyone. Rising tide raises all boats, but also in the world of sports, in the world of competition, maybe hard to achieve. Can you talk a little bit about how you're bringing people together and what that journey has looked like?
Yeah, for sure. So at the end of the day, our goal here at USTA is to grow the game of tennis, right? Like, we love tennis here. We want to keep the sport growing and thriving. And when this initiative came about, or concept came together, we saw the gap in the market of, okay, we're the national governing body of tennis in America, and this is our chance to bring everyone together for a good thing to grow the game of tennis. Once we started talking to people about it, everyone was on board. Why? Because one, they'd never have access to anything like this type of data, like I'd mentioned. And two, those companies and brands, they also want to grow the game of tennis. And this data from our end is being used for a lot of really cool things. One, we're able to now see, where the most play participation is across the United States, where the most retail is being sold, courts being booked are, and we can deploy resources accordingly to those areas now that we know where it's all coming from. Up until now, we did not have any of that. So it's hard to make really good data-driven decisions if you don't have data.
Totally fair.
Yeah, I mean, we're also able here at USTA to utilize this. And in return, the brands, they've really seen it as a way to grow the sport, and they realize that this is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. We're not putting them against each other. And to be fully transparent, they cannot see each other's data. So whenever the stuff they see is all blind, so they can't see any of it. So there's no like competing companies necessarily seeing each other's data and how many rackets were sold here by one company and how many rackets were sold here by another company. What they see is all blind, so they're not able to tell a difference.
What I'm hearing you say is you help people stay focused on the ultimate goal. Nobody wins if tennis goes away or if it atrophies. And then as you kept them focused on that, you were able to create the right views and the right incentives for everyone to play together a bit.
Yeah, and I think one other example of how this has sort of turned out to be a really cool concept is, obviously, like I mentioned, the partners, they are able to get to see the data that's in the platform. So we give them catchment reports. So that these catchment reports are like 14 pages long. They've got all kinds of different tennis data on there. And with that being said, they're able to use it to drive their business. But we've also had our sections has been benefited from this hugely because, as you guys probably know, there is a massive pickleball craze that has come about in the last couple years.
I was wondering if that would come up. Okay.
And so we're now facing, because I feel like tennis, we're not always as vocal as a lot of the pickleball people are. People seem to think that people don't play tennis anymore. They only play pickleball. And so as a result, they're trying to demolish a bunch of tennis courts or convert them to all pickleball courts. And so a lot of our sections have been able to use these catchment reports, go to city councils, boards, whatever it may be, and use it to promote tennis and be like, hey, this is the data of tennis participation in this area. Like, people actually play tennis. Like, let's find a common ground here instead of just demolishing courts altogether or fully converting them. Let's find a happy medium where we can have both tennis and pickleball in the same area.
I was gonna ask about that because for me, pickleball moves slow enough that my eye can actually do that one. So I've noticed that, like, you'll go to courts and start to see they've got double lines. They're trying to do both, and or you'll see them converting. And I was like, hey, like, to your point, how unbelievable the timing that you now have data to be like, hold on. Just because somebody else is louder doesn't mean that these other people don't exist, right? There are users here. We need to make sure we continue to support them. How interesting. Wow.
So, Brooke, do you have an ask as a recreational tennis player in this community? Do you have an ask of me to help promote the game of tennis here and the growth of the game of tennis?
Of course. I mean, we're always asking for that. We need as much help as we can get. So, yes. I just think the biggest thing is, right, pickleball, it's a great sport, great for racket sports in general. I think at the end of the day, we can really only benefit each other. We want everyone to be able to play both. We're not trying to throw pickleball under the bus or anything like that, but we want everyone to be able to play tennis and pickleball and just find some commonality here.
That's awesome. Okay, I do want to ask you one more question about USTA Connect, though. When you were rolling this out in the last year, were you ever worried that it wouldn't work? Were you ever worried that no one would use it? Did you have any of those concerns?
Sure. I think anyone that launches any type of platform or initiative, in the back of their mind, they're always going to have some sort of doubts. But I really, when I started, and maybe it's because I was so new and green to what was going on here, I never really had a true concern of, I don't think this can work. I had my concerns of, what if the brands, they don't want to work with USTA or something like that. That was more my concern, just because I knew that we'd never done anything like this before. And this was something that could actually, in return, benefit the brands as well, instead of it being a one-sided relationship.
Well, and we've talked about this with pickleball, but I'm curious. I've never thought that I could talk to somebody about a sport I was taught in elementary school where we can now measure usability of the sport. Like, in my head, when you learn how to play basketball and tennis and baseball in elementary school, those were here forever. Like, they always existed in my head, right, as a child. And so can you actually see, do you guys have data where tennis is ebbing or flowing? Is that a story in America? Which one is it?
Yep. So tennis is actually, since I think 2020, when COVID really took off, it's grown exponentially. People were stuck at home. They saw tennis as a way they could go outside, do something active, not be crammed in with other people. They on the opposite sides of the net. And because of that, the sport has really grown. We've had 4 straight years of growth. I think we're up to 23.7 million tennis players. I forget what it is off the very top of my head, but we have launched a new initiative where by 2035, we're trying to have 35 million tennis players. So,
Wow. That's awesome. And now you can measure it very easily, see where you're at with it. I do want to ask you, I think I could talk to you both all day. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think we really should, like when it comes to tennis, data, USTA Connect?
I would just say, data is a really cool thing where, like you said, you don't really realize where all the different sectors you can use data for. Like, you can really use data for everything. And I think this is a perfect example of looking around and realizing, hey, like, how do we not have any data on a situation or like a sport, for example? How do we not really have any data on this and where things are going? How do we bring everyone together and create data and see where the sport is to help grow it. I think this is just a perfect example of the title of this podcast is data-driven leadership.
Yeah. And like MCG, we are so often brought into situations where the opposite is true, right? There's so much data, people don't know what's noise and what's signal. It's interesting and a bit these days, I think it's becoming more novel to have the problem you have, Brooke, or the problem you had. And I think that also means less people on Earth have solved that recently, especially because everywhere else you're inundated. So it's like the concept of where do we begin? Where do we build the first interfaces and the first value proposition? I think that is really hard.
Yeah, it definitely is. I give so much credit to the team here. Before I started, they'd really come up with this idea, and I started, and my goal was to grow it and provide resources to partners and stuff like that. And I think once I started and we really went full force on this, everyone really came together, and that's a big part of why it's done so well.
That's awesome. MCG, can I try to put you on the spot, and maybe me too?
I suppose so.
So one of the things I'm thinking about is because we are often brought into situations where there's clients inundated with information, they don't know what data to listen to. Brooke may get there one day, and like maybe sooner rather than later. I'm trying to think of if there's any like lessons you or I have learned that would help to either prevent that from happening or to curtail it when it shows up. Does that make sense?
It does. So it sounds like you're thinking about lessons to make sure that they don't get lost in the noise. Like now, all of this information is swimming around you. How do you make sure that you keep your eye on the ball, if you will?
That was good.
You said play together earlier. We're in a pun theme now. It's going.
It was really good.
I think that what you said earlier about saying, hey, we're all here to grow the game is the most important aspect of all of this. When you think about what the common thread is between all of the people coming together, they had their own independent information before, they had their own data, they were reading it, they were analyzing it, they were creating their own stories, but now you have a complete picture, and that complete picture, it helps to grow the game of tennis. It helps to give resources and create love for the game across the country. And I think that's really important. And that unifying folks around that piece of it is where you continue your success.
I think you nailed it. I think I'm going to play back a little bit, just different words, but I think what you're saying is stay true to this. Like there's a data strategy now. And the data strategy has to stay true to the purpose or intent that we originally set forth, which is let's grow the game of tennis. And I do think, because Brooke, what I've seen too is louder voices will prevail. So people will want certain data and data sets, and suddenly you'll be prioritizing those. And if you step back, you'll be like, hold on, why are we prioritizing this? So like we've talked on the podcast and other episodes about how to build a data strategy, but this concept that is going to be really helpful, I think, is what data are we connecting and why? Because those are resources we could be using to connect different data. So why are we prioritizing these? Does it really help us with the original goal? And then also, I think value proposition is really important. No matter what we're doing with whatever energy and time and money we have, which are limited resources always, I always call it a hypothesis of a data value proposition. What do we think it's going to do for us? And stop and reevaluate. Did it do that thing or not? And if not, flip it off. Like I think a lot of people are afraid to ever turn off the data faucet. And I'm like, if it's not serving you, turn it off. It's not serving you. And I think being fearless in some of those things, otherwise the scope grows and suddenly USTA's budget can't support USTA Connect. Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's so explosive and you can't defend the value prop because you're not sure what it is. Like, I think that is often where I greet clients where I'm like, oh, we let all the voices or the loudest ones around us run amok and we need to we got to get the leash a little bit.
Exactly. And we've had conversations, of if we get to a point where partners are like, hey, we want to start seeing other types of data or this, that, and the other, we're open to talking internally and figuring out, okay, do we pivot here? Do we start doing a different type of data? What do we do here? We really do want this to benefit us and the brands as well. So
that's so cool. Okay. Speaking of data-driven leadership, what you guys have done in the last year, what you're thinking about to anticipate the needs in the future. This is why we talk about not just a data podcast, but a leadership podcast. Like that's the hard stuff. I respect my technologist colleagues. It is hard. I can't do it. But I do think the leadership piece is the piece that usually runs companies to the wrong side of the road. And then we've got issues that we have to correct. So I'm impressed, Brooke.
And I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's really important also to have the group of people that are working on this type of thing really care. I think everyone that I really work with really cares. And because of that, this has been a lot more of a success than it probably would have been if we didn't have people that didn't care about tennis or didn't care about the platform moving it forward. So
it's a great point, is people probably don't work at USTA if they don't love tennis. That's probably less common. And so you have this natural leg up on a lot of other companies that maybe there's just more passion there.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's a huge piece. Like I said, our team does a great job. And I think just the sport as a whole, like you mentioned, you're not going to work in tennis if you really don't like it. And everyone here wants to grow tennis. And I think that as this grows, hopefully it'll continue to impact the game and be a benefit. I think this platform can be so robust. Like we can, like I mentioned, can switch the types of data that we're getting, like stuff like that. I think it has a lot of potential, and hopefully we'll keep growing.
Guys, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Jess Carter. Don't forget to follow the Data-Driven Leadership wherever you get your podcasts, and rate and review, give us some feedback, and let us know how these topics are transforming your business. We can't wait for you to join us on the next episode.